Morena te whānau, I'm Richard, and this is Vic Conant. And Vic Conant, he's kind of owner, like he's a record executive, but the record label that he works for they don't do music. They do self-help, inspirational sort of stuff. And this guy grew up in this world. His dad founded this record label that does self-help, along with another guy who was a self-help guru at the time. This is the young Vic there, and he's hanging out with, that's his dad on that side, and that dude in the middle is a guy called Napoleon Hill. And he's holding a book called Think and Get Rich. It took me a moment. Think and Get Rich, exclamation mark. And what they were trying to do is they were getting these guys writing self-help, because it was kind of in its early days. You know, had people like Dale Carnegie back in the day and a few others, and they were taking these ideas and putting them in an audio format, which at the time was vinyl. Sales weren't great. No one wants to listen to this stuff out loud with everyone else able to hear it on their turntable. So things were a bit quiet, and Vic grew up and took over the business from his dad, and was trying to figure out how to make this business thrive while they were having to sort of shut things down, certain aspects of the business. And then this happened. The Sony Walkman came along, and it revolutionized everything, apparently. This is just before my time, but you couldn't before that you couldn't listen to anything through just your headphones, right? Like, this is so normal now for us to have AirPods in or what have you. But at the time, this was the first time that you could take an listening experience and just completely privatize it to your own ears. And self-help then took off. This guy, Shad Helmstetter, was one of the self-help gurus who was an early adopter of the cassette format. And I'm going to play you a little excerpt of his that you get a feel for. Imagine you're in the 1980s. You're struggling a bit. You need a bit of help and advice in life, wondering who you are and where you're going. And you've got your Walkman that you got for Christmas, and you stick on your headphones, put on a bit of Shad, and this is what you hear.
You are incredible. That's right. You have a lot going for you. You always did. And now it's time to let yourself live out the incredible potential that you were born with. You've had it all the time. You were born to be an exceptional human being. And each day you give yourself the winning words of self-talk that say, I like myself. I'm glad to be me. I like myself. I'm glad to be me. I like myself. I'm glad to be me.
So you can see why you wouldn't want to put that on the turntable and blast it. But with a Walkman, this could be a bit of a game changer. And so the Walkman and the cassette tape were pretty instrumental in helping self-help go from a kind of a small thing to a massive thing that it is today. And, it's become a part of our culture, self-help, and this kind of sort of pop therapeutic sort of a thing. We speak the language of pop psychology a lot, and we kind of have a laugh about it too, and we scoff about it a lot of the time. I think people scoff in general, but sometimes as Christians we scoff as well. We make fun of this kind of thing, self-talk, positive self-talk, participation trophies. That seems to be a thing to complain about, or certificates, for participating. The kids these days, they need to toughen up, and we're not going to just we shouldn't be giving them, honors for just turning up or what have you. I don't feel quite as strongly about that, but a lot of the time we kind of get that sometimes the positive affirmation stuff, maybe it's too much, I don't know. Like, we're telling kids they're special and that they're unique, and like being a millennial and coming of age as I have is sort of a process of realizing not that special, not that unique. But I don't know. I mean, there's pros and cons. I'm not talking about parenting here. I don't want to get into that, all that kind of stuff. I'm just simply saying that we're kind of aware that there's this sort of atmosphere, I guess, cultural atmosphere that we've been living in for a while. And we often scoff at it because, and maybe particularly as Christians, we look at it and we go, people have too high a view of themselves, too high a view of what it means to be human. Over the next few weeks, we're going to be looking at a series, looking at what's theologians call the Imago Dei. Generally, we'd want to avoid Latin phrases here, but this is one that you hear a lot amongst theologians, partly because what it means is image of God, but it's a little bit clumsy to keep saying that all the time. Imago Dei is the Latin phrase, but it just means image of God, and we're going to be looking over the next few weeks at this theme throughout the Bible, and we're going to start in Genesis 1. So Genesis 1 is where I'd like you to turn if you're the kind of person who turns when you're listening to a sermon or opens an app or whatever. And I want to draw your attention to very famous verses, won't be new to most of you, but worth another look. And these are verses 26 onwards. Now, I want us to be, as we listen to this, read this, I want us to be thinking about this question: what is a human being for? What is our job? I know we often talk about like purpose and that sort of thing, but I like phrasing it like this because it's a little bit different to think about. Like, well, what's our job? What are we for, in a sense? So this is what it says, starting in verse 26. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground. And then skip to verse 31. God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Now, this idea of being made in the image of God, this has been debated and considered and written about and talked about for millennia. It's a rich idea. It provokes a lot of thought and productive kind of idea that gets us thinking about lots of helpful and important things. And over the years, over the centuries, thinkers have posed different interpretations of what it means to be made in the image of God. We'll talk a little bit about some of those different theories in a bit, but one thing that hasn't happened a lot throughout Christian history has been interpreting this in its context, its biblical literary context. Because when you read it, it almost just sort of jumps out, and it's this, it's a very interesting, provocative idea. And so what has tended to happen a lot of the time is that people have taken the idea and thought, what could this possibly mean? And they've sort of almost philosophized about it and run with it and come up with a lot of different ideas of what it means. Some of those ideas might be helpful, but what we want to do is look at not just that sort of little sliver there, but we want to look at it in its actual context, its literary context, in Genesis chapter 1. Now, Genesis chapter 1, I'm no expert in it, but I am drawing on an expert this morning, so a lot of what you'll hear in terms of the sort of interpretation stuff that we do today comes from an Old Testament scholar called Richard Middleton, and also I'm drawing on my brother Nick a little bit here. Some of you will remember, Well, a few weeks ago, he spoke on faith and science and did this elective. And if you're in the elective, he drew up a little bit of a table. I'm gonna put a little bit of a table up here. And although Richard Middleton is one of the guys that's brought this idea to us, it is an idea that has a lot of currency and is pretty widely accepted amongst experts in this kind of thing. So if we look at Genesis chapter 1, its entirety, you probably know the story. Most of you probably have heard it about the various days, right? It's organized according to days. And that has a certain kind of meaning and gives it a kind of structure that I want us to look into. So right at the beginning of Genesis, it says, now, well, first of all, of course, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Formless and empty. And what happens over the next few days is God takes this formless, empty heaven and earth, if you like, and starts to form it and to fill it. Let me show you what I mean. So, day one, God creates light and dark. Then day two creates the sky with the waters underneath it. Day three, land with vegetation. Right, so he's forming over the first 3 days, forming what was formless. But then there's this kind of parallel thing happens, starting day 4. So on day 1 you have light and dark. Day 4, that light and that dark is filled by these luminaries, the sun and the moon and the stars. We have light and dark before we have sun and moon and stars. So he creates this, forms light and dark, and then he fills it with these heavenly bodies. Again, on day 5, creates sea creatures and birds. So on day 2, creates a sky with the waters below, and then on its sort of counterpart day, if you like, day 5, he fills the water and the sky. And then on day 6, he creates animals all over the land that he's created. You know, he's formed the land with the vegetation, and then he fills that with animals and also with us. And then on day 7, he rests. And that's kind of an idea of a king sitting on his throne in his palace. Now, this is a significant, insight into this passage. This idea of filling and forming. God is taking what was formless and empty, forming it and filling it. And then at the sort of the high point, the crescendo of this passage, we have the creation of human beings in God's image. And it's not just left there like that. It's put in a context. And the context, well, let's just have a look. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it." Fill the earth. Filling. Subdue it. Forming. God is saying to humanity here, fill it and form it. Keep filling and forming. God started off forming and filling. And now he rests and he hands it over and he says, now you are made in my image. Keep doing it. Keep filling and forming. And the phrase is flipped around. Richard Middleton says, yeah, because humans, we have to procreate first. We have to fill first, then form, basically. But it's the same. It's carrying on something of the same job. And now we're starting to understand what, in its context, what it means to be made in God's image. It's got something to do with filling and forming, and it's got something to do with ruling. See here, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So biblical experts will say, this passage has a kind of royal flavor. It has a kind of, there's kind of kingship in the background. Some of these things are sometimes lost on us because we're not the original audience and we don't catch all the clues. By the way, you'll sometimes hear people talking about something very similar with Genesis 1, but in terms of Genesis 1 being a temple. And I think that's right. But temple and kingdom and kings and so forth, these are kind of, the lines between them are pretty blurry in the ancient world. Because a temple is just a palace for a god. So it's almost like a slightly different way of looking at the same sort of thing. And so it's kind of royal. We have this king, God, but underneath it, we have us. Now, what does it mean to be made in God's image? Now, this has been debated amongst theologians, like I said, for a long time. And I want us to break it down into three kind of categories. This is a little bit dry and technical, but it might be helpful because we're going to spend the next few weeks looking at this topic. So the first theory that has sometimes been advanced in various ways by theologians over the years, sometimes called substantial theories, which is to say that there's something about the substance of us as humans that reflects who God is. And so, for example, it might be something like you're a spiritual being. Like as a human, you're a spiritual creature, and that is a reflection of who God is. Or a popular one a few hundred years ago was that, human reason, our ability to reason is somehow a reflection of God. Something about our substance. Another view is a relational view that relationality is at the core of what it means to reflect who God is. Remembering, of course, that God is triune. God is a community, if you like, in and of himself. And the third theory or group of theories is are called functional. That what it means to be made in the image of God isn't so much what's in you, so much as what your job is, what your function is. And that's what we're talking about here. Now, I think a lot of these are complementary. You don't necessarily have to pick one against all the others. But I think if we're looking at this, in its sort of strictest biblical sense, I think it leads us probably to favor the functional view, at least here in Genesis 1. Now, the Bible, being authored as it is, not only by people but by the Spirit of God, has this amazing ability to have layers of meaning that can sort of unfold over time. And so, like I said, these other ideas might have some merit. But I think what this passage is really pointing us towards is this functional view, that we have a function, and it's about ruling. It's about filling and forming. And these are all ideas that in the ancient Near East would be understood as sort of kingly kinds of functions. So we've got God the King. We've got us, God's image bearers. But we've got little crowns, because part of what that means is that we're sort of, sometimes scholars will say vice regents. I don't know what that means. I think it means something like a governor general or something like that. It's like a sub-ruler. So we've got God who's supreme ruler. He is king. And then he makes us to be like these mini rulers under him, carrying on the job of filling and forming. And then there's all creation underneath. That's our job. And that's part of what it means to be made in God's image. We dig into it a little bit more. We get a bit more of a glimpse as we carry on. In Genesis chapter 2, it says that the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and take care of it, forming it. We were made to be gardeners. I hate gardening. I'm very unlike Nick in this regard. Like Nick often will talk about the fact that when I use an illustration, it'll be from pop culture. When he uses an illustration, it's from gardening. I don't know anything about gardening, but let me tell you this. Here, gardening is everything. And I mean that almost kind of literally. Gardening is everything. Let's take a gardening word, tilling. You till the soil, apparently, and apparently that helps things grow. And you don't make the thing grow, you till the soil so that it can grow. You know what I mean? You're just you're drawing up out of the ground some sort of magic, but by tilling the soil. Now, Latin, for a long, long time, it's like theologians' favorite language in much of the churches. Latin for tilling is cultura. In English, that has come into English and given us lots of words like horticulture, agriculture, and just culture. Now, it's kind of interesting, but you cultivate, right? You cultivate the ground, and you cultivate, you till the ground, I guess, and you cultivate a plant and enable it to grow or create the conditions in order for it to draw it up out of this creation that God has given us. Most theologians, biblical scholars, as far as I'm aware, the ones that I am aware of, take this idea of gardening, if you like, to be much bigger than just growing fruit or trees or what have you. God has created this creation. He hands us the job of continuing that, of filling and forming. And so we cultivate it and we draw up out of it, yes, plant life, but also culture. We're not making, you and me, we don't make anything out of nothing. We just take what was there, till the soil, and hey presto, draw some things up out of it. I mean, not to like overblow it a little bit, but there's something godlike in that. I mean, don't mishear me. I'm not saying we are God or on an equal level playing field with God or any of that kind of stuff. It's just simply to acknowledge that God has given us this ability. And you watch, I find it mind-blowing listening to podcasts about Kanzi, the bonobo can almost talk. And my octopus teacher, apparently octopus are incredibly intelligent. None of them are building cities. Like, they're intelligent, but we are made in the image of God, and we create culture in all of this. Now, I know it's weird hearing that this is sort of part of our job, because most of the time we think of this stuff as a distraction from what should be our real job of being spiritual. I don't think that's quite the case. If we look at Genesis chapter 11, like Genesis, so it starts out really good, and then it gets bad, and then it gets even worse. And it sort of like reaches a high point. Anyway, we get to Genesis 11, and this is the Tower of Babel. And this is a story you hear when you're a little kid. And the way I understood it when I was a little kid was that there was a problem. They were building a tower and trying to get into heaven by building a tower and not relying on God, I guess. But that's not, I think, the problem. In verse 4? Yeah. Then they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city." That's culture. That's like maximum culture. Culture at a critical mass. With a tower that reaches to the heavens. Okay, so far so good. Sunday school lesson. Yep. We're building a tower. That's a problem. So that we may make a name for ourselves. That's the problem. In chapter 12, God calls Abram and he says, "I will make your name great, and you'll be a blessing." The problem with the Tower of Babel, the problem with the work of culture, the problem with forming isn't in the job itself, it's the orientation. It's that it's about making our name great and not about making God's name great. But this job of filling and forming, of ruling, is never retracted. It's never abandoned. It is still what we do as humans and ought to do. However, we ought to do it oriented towards God and making his name great, not our own. but cultivating, tilling what God has given us, filling and forming, making something of it, to quote, to making something of the world, to quote Andy Crouch, a well-known Christian writer. That is what we are here to do. And so gardening, yes, it's gardening, but it's everything. We're gardeners of God's creation, drawing up all this kind of stuff, and the act of doing it is not wrong. It's not bad. It's what we're here to do. It's the orientation, and that a way towards ourselves. That is the essence of sin, and that is why we see so much that, is that we ought to look at and say that's not right. That's not good. But it's not the task itself. This idea, I was kind of presenting something similar to some of the sisters and brothers at Tauwhare Church a couple of years ago. And Tauwhare Church is at the marae, just about 10, 15 minutes out of Cambridge. And one of the elders there is a guy called Kevin Rapana. And Kevin said, he was like, kaitiaki. He said, the idea here is kaitiaki. And I think it's a good one because what's often happened, particularly in the Western mind, is we've sometimes looked at this and we've gone, so God has given us creation to do whatever we want with. And this has often been used as a kind of justification for just, exploiting the earth, we might say. And perhaps we're seeing some of the effects of that. But kaitiaki, the Māori concept of being a carer for, guardian of the land, that's more the idea, I think, of what it means to be made in the image of God, to fill and to form and to rule over creation. And so I think in some ways we might say that our problem in our world, the modern world, isn't that we have too high a view of ourselves, it's that it's too low. We think that there's no big purpose, so we just seek our own enjoyment. We think that there's no eternity to our lives, so we live for the here and now and for the self. We think our bodies don't matter, so we do what we like with them. We think people are defined by what they believe politically or what have you, and so we denigrate those who we disagree with. We think of human life as accidental and therefore ultimately meaningless, so we treat human beings as though they are not sacred, when in fact they are, in a way. So this idea of being made in the image of God was revolutionary when it was first said, because the only people that were ever talked about being made in the image of God in the ancient world were kings. Everyone else, you're not. What's revolutionary about this text is it's saying we're all made in the image of God, and in a sense we're all kings. I know it's weird language, but we share some of that responsibility to be kaitiaki. And because of this, it remains revolutionary. Because of our status as being made in the image of God, we have a purpose. We are rulers and kaitiaki under God's rule. Our lives have eternal ramifications. Our bodies matter, and so what we do with our bodies matters. Every person's value is inherent. And you, me, no one is a mistake. Your parents may not have planned you. 6 years between me and my brother. I know what's up. But you're not a mistake. No one's a mistake. We have a revolutionary message about what it means to be human. And it's not too high, it's too low. The idea out there is not too high, it's too low. What we are presenting is something higher, less self-oriented, and it's God-oriented, and it's oriented to His creation. When I was a young adult, I came across this quotation from a famous Really, really, really old theologian, a guy called Irenaeus. Now, at the time, I don't think I'd ever had said this out loud, but I had absorbed an idea that in order to be a follower of Jesus, I sort of thought it meant I had to be somehow less human. Like, suppress your humanness to be more like Jesus. But I don't think that's quite right. We put to death sin, for sure, but not our humanness. And Irenaeus helped me catch this a little bit. This is Irenaeus, stained glass version of him. And he was really, really around in the early days of the church, and he wrote, we would say a book. In those days, they wrote treatises. It was called Against Heresies, and he was writing against heresies. And the main heresy he was writing against was Gnosticism. And Gnosticism is one that many of you will be familiar with because it was a big deal in biblical times, New Testament times, where the physical world was thought to be not very good, like God says it is in Genesis 1, but to be kind of scummy, kind of evil. And so for people that were encountering the gospel, some of them couldn't wrap their heads around it. They were like, you're telling me that God became part of this icky stuff with this kind of body? Ugh, gross. No, can't deal with it. And so they would refute the idea that God did that, and that's what John has got a bee in his bonnet about in 1 John. That's the heresy he's speaking out against. John mentored a guy called Polycarp, and Polycarp mentored this guy Irenaeus. He's just a couple of generations later. And he's still battling the same thing, the denigration of human bodies and this kind of low view of what it means to be human. And he says this: the glory of God is a human being fully alive. And he's talking primarily about Jesus, but he's also talking about us. Because we are being made to be like Jesus. And Jesus is the one who perfectly images who God is. Jesus shows us what it is to be human. And by following him, we are being made to be human as we were originally created to be. Let me just pray. I want to pray and also at the same time transition us to communion. So, let's pray. King Jesus, you really are King. King of creation. And we're just blown away with the fact that we were ever entrusted with the task of filling and forming, of ruling in the first place, let alone to be entrusted with that again in your family, following and becoming more like you, being made more like you by your Spirit. That's a tremendous honor. We don't want to be self-glorifying in our view of ourselves. We don't want to have that kind of high view, if you like. We want to have the high view that just takes seriously the fact that we are made in God's image, and therefore we are kaitiaki, and we are servants of you. We see what servanthood looks like in you. You became one of us in real physical flesh. It's not beneath you. But you didn't do it to sit on a throne and establish a kind of glorious kingly power in the way that we would imagine it. You did it by living a very humble life, being familiar with suffering and dying on the cross. And we want to do that. We want to be that kind of ruler, if you like. We want to reflect more of that in our lives. So we pray that you would help us to do that by your Spirit. And we thank you for your sacrifice and that you came back to life and you offer us that new life today. Amen.